My academic background actually started from a professional journalism background. My father and grandfather both worked for newspapers in Texas. My dad in Times Herald in Dallas. My grandfather was an oil editor of the Houston Chronicle, and so it came through that from a rich writing background. I was an editor of my junior high school paper and an editor of my high school paper, and actually the cartoonist as well. So I did columns and did a cartoon strip for the paper, and got a camera and said, "Hey, photography is a lot easier than writing." And so I just fell in love with photography, and I went to University of Texas and got my undergraduate degree in journalism and photojournalism emphasis, and worked for 3 years at the Times-Picayune newspaper in New Orleans, and would come back to the University of Texas. My professor, J.B. Colson, who I actually dedicate my visual communication book to, who taught me how to see. I would come back to his class with some slides. This is what it's like to work for a newspaper. And I just loved it. Actually, I did a lot of theater in high school as well. And I liked being in front of groups and then talking about something that I love. And so I was talking to him whether I should go on and what should I do. And he convinced me to if I wanted to teach, I have to get a master's and a PhD. So I went to Minnesota because I lived in New Orleans where the Mississippi River ends, and I thought, well, where it begins kind of is a nice circle there. And so, and they also let me teach a photojournalism course while I was getting my master's there. Another mentor, Jim Brown, was head of photojournalism at Minnesota, and he went to Indiana to become the associate dean of the journalism school. And he pretty much convinced me to get my PhD at Indiana, and so went through that. And the first job I had was teaching. Was at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, and I was there 3 or 4 years, just long enough to finish my dissertation, pretty much, and then was hired in Cal State Fullerton. So I've moved from Disney World to Disneyland, and I tell people, yeah, I've worked at 2 Mickey Mouse universities, but it's very similar students and area, actually. So it's been a nice transition. I've been in Fullerton since 1990. My contribution to the field started as being a photographer and really a mediocre photojournalist. I did some good assignments and some pictures that I'm proud of, but I never reached the next level in terms of what I thought my potential could be as a shooter of photojournalism. But it's interesting to me, chart my career, that now that I teach photojournalism and visual communication, I've turned back into my writing roots and actually now find it much easier and much more satisfying in a lot of different ways. At least it's a different kind of emotional attachment to your work when you're writing, and so doing much more of that. And started my dissertation from Indiana University was a photojournalism ethics textbook, which I was fortunate to, when I was done, convince a publisher to have published, and also did an ethics book for National Press Photography Association as well. And those are really the first books that concentrated on photojournalism ethics. And so that was exciting to be a part of that and have people accept that work. And so it's the love for photography and photojournalism, but the writing is real critical and interesting in terms of career development. So, and from that, the photojournalism book branching into just general visual communication, and the textbook that I wrote on that is a result of that. Having that photojournalism ethics book available made it a lot easier to talk to editors. And in fact, they're now calling me before the conference. I usually get a couple of calls, and what are you working on? And oh, my dance card is filled. Sorry, So, but I am currently working a contract with Wadsworth on a book that I'm calling Visual Reporting, which is, I think, going to be an important contribution to the field, because it expands that idea of photojournalism. Of course, just interested in the pictures, which is what most photojournalism textbooks necessarily concentrate on. But you also need to know how to write, and you need to know how to do graphics and design. You need to know how to do motion and sound. You need to know how to work on the web and database and informational graphics. And then, of course, writers need to know all about that. And graphic design people need to know about photography and all that as well. So it's going to be interesting. So it's not just for photojournalism students, but it's that idea of converging a lot of these different skills, and we really need to know more than just still photography. We have to write and do video and graphic design, and on the web as well as print. So it's I think that's gonna be a real good project to work on. The underlying current in a lot of my work is ethical images, ethical philosophy, why people make images, and how they make images, whether they're taking the picture, how those images are used, and then, of course, as a reader or a viewer, the response that people have. So the visual communication course and textbook concentrates on the analysis, but it's always underlying, and this is, of course, my roots in photojournalism ethics, the ethical perspective. And that's what I actually tell people. Of those 6 perspectives for analysis, I personally think the ethical perspective is the most important, and I talk about 6 separate ethical philosophies throughout history, and out of those 6 philosophies, John Rawls's Veil of Ignorance, the shoe on the other foot, imagining yourself in someone else's position, getting out of your own body or mindset, and just really thinking about what the effect that a certain image, a stereotype, might have on somebody that comes from that cultural group. And so I emphasize that in every chapter, the ethical perspective in every chapter, and it's really a mainstay of even in the beginning chapters with light and brain. There are stories and little side things that, and of course in my presentations in my class and the examples that I use, I'm doing that as well. Also, because of my journalism experience, my dad actually was an advertising writer for the Times Herald in Dallas, and then had his own agency. He worked for Tracy Locke Advertising Agency in Dallas, and I remember he was always so proud that they did, maybe they still do, Frito-Lay, and he was telling me, yeah, I worked on the Frito Bandito advertising campaign, which of course was a huge flop and a terrible stereotype. So I always I think that's funny. Maybe I'm trying to make up for that for him by emphasizing ethics. But so, and then he went into public relations and advertising as well. So I've always had that kind of strong influence, and kind of had a negative view of it in terms of its use and how visual messages are used for persuasion. So, in terms of journalism and public relations and advertising and the dangers I think there are of mixing those, that's another kind of underlying current in my work, and of course it's a separate chapter in the book as well, and visual persuasion that perhaps sets it apart from other books in the field. There aren't really criticisms of my 6 perspectives because every book is going to have a different way of looking at it and different emphasis, and they're going to call it different things. There are some critics and writers, friends of mine, that do emphasize a theory perhaps more than another. There are Gestalt approach theorists that actually with the VISCOM conference in Utah, the Tiemens and Zettel organized. There's a lot of Gestalt, looking at images as if the images stopped at the eye, pretty much, or at the retina anyway, or maybe the visual cortex in the back there. And I have a problem with that because, of course, we also know what we're looking at, and we can't, I don't think, separate what we see and what it really means and what it is. So I'm much stronger in the semiotics idea of the signs that images have and you can learn from, and so but it's not really criticism. It's just that, well, why didn't you spend more time with Gestalt or some other approach? And David Marr's work, for example, I don't even mention because, quite honestly, it makes no sense. But there's a lot of people that really support his way of approaching images, and I think it's brilliantly done. I just haven't grown up in that tradition, I suppose, and that maybe that comes from my roots as a professional. But so I'm much more interested in the meaning of the graphic elements within a visual message. The strengths of my visual communication book are the methodology I think I've got for the analysis of images, and whether you're looking at typography, graphic design, cartoon still images, or moving images in motion picture television or computers, the same kind of steps that you go through talking about images from all those different media you can use to really think about and think about the meaning of the images. So that's one thing. I've got 6 perspectives that I go through that for analysis. And another thing that I like about writing is that for my dissertation, of course, is necessarily very dry and formal language, and so from that I was able to make the photojournalism ethics book from that a little more informal, and then gradually I'm getting more of myself in the book, so I was able to do a lot more of that in my visual communication book, and then so the next project, you can do that. So just the style and just kind of a way of that we all see visuals and trying to get the meaning from the visuals. I think in kind of an informal, and it doesn't have to be real serious style, is an important aspect of it. And a lot of people tell me they like the some of the humor and some of the stories of it as well. So that's real gratifying. I've been working for the last 5 or 10 years on a visual theory, a unifying visual theory that I actually included in my preliminary work on the topic. Francis Crick discovered DNA and wrote a book on consciousness, and I'm blanking out on the title. It's a fairly recent book, and the whole nature of consciousness. And it's really a book about visual perception and visual messages and meaning to a certain extent as well. But he says it's going to take at least another decade, maybe longer, before a new visual theory really becomes known and accepted. And he wasn't really coming up with a visual theory in his book, but it was kind of a call for action. And when I first read that, and because I had already done some work in my theory, I thought, well, come on. I mean, I could work on it, and it's not going to take 20, 30 years. And then the more I get involved in it, I'm saying 20 years is way too short, because I've got the basic outline right now, and I'm so thankful to Kevin Barnhurst, a good friend of mine at Syracuse, who had a book out, Seeing the Newspaper, fairly recently. He was a reviewer, one of the reviewers of my visual communication book, and he had advised me to leave that part out. For one thing, it's a new theory; it's untested. So that's one project, and so I'm getting basic format for that. But now I'm having to learn all about the science of light and the physiology, really in-depth physiology of the eye and the brain, much more than what I researched for the visual communication book, and how it all fits together. But basically, I'm trying to come up. My basic idea is that words and pictures are really the same, and it comes from that communication idea that words and pictures used equally in respectful ways is the most powerful medium of expression that we've got, and that's why all through history the two have been together. I'm deeply alarmed that people and because of my background in words, but I'm so visible in terms of an advocate for visual communication. I mean, I almost wish there was some kind of visual verbal, some kind of word that would combine, so we know we're not just talking about images. But people assume that that's all I care about, just pictures. But of course, whether words are included in the presentation, or you're analyzing the images using words in your head, or writing about the images. You can't separate the two, and so it's very radical. I remember talking with Tiemens, and Bob Tiemens said that you're going against everything everyone ever says when you say words and pictures are the same. Well, what do you really mean by that? That's on the face of it not really true, but in one sense, in a typographical sense, words are pictures and pictures are words. So that's a long-term project on the back burner. I'm also been involved in philosophy and have a book on the web, The Zen of Photojournalism, and I'm trying to get that published. And I use that for the first time in my photojournalism class. So that's available on the web, and I'm trying to get a printed version. Actually, I made my own copies and sold them through the National Press Photographers Association, and sold them all out. And people still, photographers who have gotten it, send me email and contact me that they've really learned from that. Another thing I'm working on is a book called The Spiral Web on the Nature of Coincidence. And this is another outgrowth of photography and being observant, because a photographer notices relationships between people that come and go, and you kind of look for like the decisive moment at Cartier-Bresson. And so, and journalists, of course, when a plane crashes, and then you're going, the next few days, you're going to have these stories of people who were on that fatal plane crash and people who missed it for one reason or another. And so I'm just collecting a lot of stories that friends and other people have sent me, and my own kind of coincidences that I've experienced, and also doing a lot of academic research on it. So it's, you know, the teaching profession, I guess, a bottom line here, the teaching profession has really afforded me this wonderful opportunity to just, you know, be curious, you know, and learn stuff. And what you learn, you communicate in classes, and you communicate in print, you communicate on the web now, and just talking to people. And so I get paid to learn, but I also get paid to give it away, pretty much. And so it's just a perfect profession.